There are houses that aren't haunted because they are abandoned, but abandoned because they do not want to be alone. In a narrow alley in Bangkok, there is a house where, every night at 2 a.m., the lights turn on by themselves, no hands on the switch. No one inside. Tenants come. Tenants leave. Some run away. Some never leave at all. This is a story whispered for years, passed from mouth to mouth. The house that turns on its lights at 2 a.m. Chapter 1. The house no one would rent. The house stood at the very end of a narrow alley in the outer districts of Bangkok, where the streetlights flickered as if they were already tired of staying awake. 3 stories tall, painted a dull yellow that had long since faded into the color of old bone. It leaned slightly to one side, like a body that had never fully recovered from an illness. For 7 years, no one had lived there longer than 3 nights. That wasn't written anywhere. There was no warning sign, no police tape, no official record, but everyone in the neighborhood knew it. Taxi drivers refused to stop near the alley. Food delivery apps marked the location as unreachable. At night, even stray dogs avoided the place, choosing to sleep farther down the street instead. Korn didn't know any of this when he first saw the listing. He was a final-year architecture student, exhausted, broke, and desperate for a place close to his construction internship. When he saw the rent, less than half the market price, he thought it was a mistake. "Is there something wrong with the house?" Korn asked the agent, half joking. The agent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said quickly. "The owner just wants someone quiet." That should have been the moment Korn walked away. The first night passed without incident. The house was strangely clean, as if someone had just finished tidying up and stepped out moments before Korn arrived. There was no dust on the shelves, no cobwebs in the corners. Even the air smelled faintly of soap and burnt incense. But the silence was wrong. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was heavy, pressing against Korn's ears until he became painfully aware of every small sound, his own breathing, the soft creak of the wooden floor, the distant hum of the city that never quite reached the end of the alley. Sometime after midnight, Korn noticed something strange. He could hear a ticking sound. Tick, tick, tick. He sat up in bed, confused. There was no clock in the room. He checked his phone, no notifications, no alarms, no apps running. Still, the ticking continued, steady and patient, like something counting down. When Korn finally drifted back to sleep, he dreamed of light spilling across the floor, warm and yellow, even though he distinctly remembered turning every switch off. He would later realize that the house had already started watching him. And it never sleeps alone. Chapter 2. 1:59 a.m. Korn woke up with the unsettling certainty that he was no longer alone. His eyes opened slowly, reluctantly, as if some instinct deep inside him was warning that seeing too clearly might be a mistake. The room was dark, but not completely. A faint gray glow seeped through the curtains, the kind of light that exists only in the hours before dawn, when the world feels unfinished. His chest felt tight. It wasn't a nightmare. There had been no images, no screams, no sudden jolt of fear. Instead, it was worse, a calm awareness, heavy and undeniable, that someone was standing close enough to be felt but not seen. Korn didn't move. He listened. No footsteps. No breathing. No shifting of weight on the wooden floor. Only silence, thick, deliberate silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. His hands slid toward his phone on the bedside table. The screen lit up instantly, too bright in the darkness. 1:59 a.m. A strange wave of relief washed over him. It was still early. Nothing had happened. His imagination, he told himself. New house, new sounds, new fears. Then the light turned on. Not suddenly, not violently. The living room light came alive with a soft, almost gentle click, followed by a warm yellow glow spreading under the bedroom door. It was the kind of light that suggested intention, someone who knew exactly where the switch was. Someone who had turned it on 1,000 times before. Korn sat upright. "Hello?" he called out, his voice thin and unfamiliar. No answer. He swung his legs off the bed and opened the door. The living room was empty. The sofa sat exactly where it had been earlier. The curtains were still drawn. The front door remained locked. The deadbolt firmly in place. No open windows. No signs of forced entry. Quorn's eyes drifted to the wall. The light switch was in the off position. Yet the light above him burned steadily, humming softly, casting long shadows that seemed just a little too stretched, just a little too alive. A chill crept up his spine. He reached for the main breaker and flipped it down. The house fell into darkness. For a moment, Quorn allowed himself to breathe. Then, click. The light came back on.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. Nothing was standing there. Quorn stood frozen in the middle of the living room, his hand still hovering near the breaker box. The light above him glowed steadily, indifferent to his confusion, indifferent to the laws that were supposed to govern it. There was no flicker, no sign of unstable wiring, just a calm, unwavering brightness, as if the house was trying to convince him that this was perfectly normal. It wasn't. Quorn walked slowly across the room, each step careful, deliberate. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet, but the sound felt distant, muted, as though the house were absorbing it before it could fully exist. He checked the front door again. Locked. He pressed his forehead against the cool metal for a moment, grounding himself in the sensation. Cold was real. Metal was real. Fear, he told himself, was temporary. He turned back to the light switch. Off. His fingers trembled as he flipped it on. Then off again. Nothing changed. The light did not react. A thin layer of sweat formed along his neck. This isn't possible, Quorn whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. He unplugged the television. Then the refrigerator. Then every visible appliance in the room. Still, the light stayed on. Quorn returned to the breaker box and pulled the main switch down once more. Holding it there this time, counting silently in his head. 1, 2, 3. Darkness. He exhaled shakily. Then, without warning, the light returned, not gradually, not hesitantly, but instantly, flooding the room as if darkness had never existed at all. Quorn staggered backward. In that split second, just before he blinked, he thought he saw something. Not a person. Not a shape he could name. Just the impression of presence, standing exactly where the light pooled brightest, as though something had been there and had stepped away the moment it realized it was being seen. His heart pounded violently against his ribs. "Who's there?" he shouted, louder this time. The house answered him with silence. But it was different now. The silence felt intentional. Quorn noticed then that the air had changed. It was warmer near the light, uncomfortably so. Like standing too close to a body for too long. The smell of soap was gone, replaced by something faint and sharp, burnt plastic. Maybe, or hair. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the empty space beneath the light. Nothing stood there. And yet, every instinct in his body screamed that something had been. That something was still watching. And that it was pleased. Chapter 4. The woman at the end of the alley. Quorn did not sleep again that night. He sat on the edge of his bed until dawn, fully dressed, a backpack at his feet, convinced that if he lay down, even for a moment, he might not wake up at all. The light in the living room stayed on until morning. It did not flicker. It did not dim. It simply remained, as if waiting. When the sky finally began to pale, Quorn left the house. The alley looked different in daylight. Narrow, uneven, lined with low concrete walls and tangled electrical wires that sagged like veins. Life returned slowly. Motorbikes passed. A man swept dust from his storefront. A dog slept in the shade. The house at the end of the alley, however, seemed unchanged, its windows dark and unreadable. At the corner, an old woman sat behind a small wooden cart piled with bananas and incense sticks. Her hair was gray and tightly pulled back. Her skin darkened by decades of sun. She watched Quorn approach with a look that was not curiosity, but recognition. "You stayed the night," she said before he could speak. Quorn stopped. "Yes, I just moved in." The woman's hands froze mid-motion. "And, last night?" she asked quietly. Quorn hesitated, Something about her tone made his throat tighten. The light turned on, he said, at exactly 2. The old woman closed her eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing, then she shook her head slowly, as if mourning something that had already happened. So it has begun again, she murmured. Korn felt a chill despite the growing heat of the morning. What do you mean? She looked up at him sharply. Did you see anyone? No, Korn replied, but I felt something. The woman reached under her cart and pulled out a bundle of incense. She lit one without explanation, the smoke curling upward in thin, restless lines. That house, she said, lowering her voice, does not like to be empty. And it does not like strangers. Korn swallowed. Why does the light turn on? Her gaze drifted down the alley, toward the house. Because at 2 in the morning, she said, that is when they come home. They? Korn repeated. The woman met his eyes. Her pupils seemed unnaturally dark. Those who died there, she said simply, and those who were never allowed to leave. A sudden weight pressed against Korn's chest. Why would the owner rent it out again? The old woman exhaled smoke through her nose. Because no one stays, she said, and because the house must be fed. She leaned closer. If the light turns on again tonight, she whispered, do not follow it, do not speak, and whatever you hear, do not answer. Korn opened his mouth to ask more questions. But when he blinked, the woman had already turned away, rearranging her bananas as if the conversation had never happened. Behind him, at the end of the alley, the house stood silently. And for just a moment, Korn thought he saw a faint yellow glow behind the curtains, still burning. Even in daylight.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The night the house burned. By noon, Korn had convinced himself that he needed answers. Fear without explanation was unbearable. If he could understand what had happened in that house, if he could reduce it to history, to facts, to something that had already ended, then maybe the light, the silence, the feeling of being watched would lose their power. He was wrong. At a small police station 2 districts away, Korn pretended to be doing research for a university project. An older officer, bored and half asleep behind his desk, barely looked up as Korn asked about a fire that had occurred 7 years ago. At the end of a narrow alley. The officer paused. His fingers stopped tapping. You shouldn't be asking about that place, he said finally. But he still opened the drawer. The report was thin, too thin for a house fire that had killed 4 people. A family. Father, mother, 2 children. Time of incident, 2 a.m. Cause of death, smoke inhalation and severe burns. Cause of fire, undetermined. No faulty wiring. No accelerants. No signs of forced entry. According to the report, neighbors had noticed something strange before the fire trucks arrived. The lights were on, the officer muttered, almost to himself. Every room, all at once. Korn's stomach tightened. Was anyone awake inside? The officer shook his head. No screams, no calls for help, just light. Korn left the station with copies of the report and a growing sense of dread that settled deep in his bones. That evening, he spoke to a man who had lived 2 houses away at the time of the fire. The man refused to let Korn inside, choosing instead to talk through a half-open gate. I saw it, the man said, his voice low. I was awake. I worked night shifts. What did you see? Korn asked. The house was lit up like it was welcoming someone home. The man replied. Then I smelled smoke. He hesitated. But the strange thing, he continued, was that the fire started after the lights turned on, not before. Korn felt his pulse quicken. Did you see anyone go in? No, the man said. But I saw someone standing at the window. Very still. Who? The man's eyes flicked toward the end of the alley. The mother, he said. At least, I thought it was her. She didn't move, she didn't wave, she just stood there, watching us. That night, Korn returned to the house just before sunset. The living room light was off. For now. As darkness fell and the house grew quiet again, Korn sat alone on the floor. The police report spread out before him. The words blurred together. At 1:58 a.m., the air began to warm. At 1:59, the familiar pressure returned, the sense of being observed. Korn did not look up. When 2 a.m. arrived, the light turned on. And this time, the smell of smoke came with it. Chapter 6. The camera could not see the light. Korn installed the camera the next morning. He told himself it was for peace of mind, for proof, for something solid he could point to and say, "This is real. I am not imagining it." As an architecture student, he trusted records, measurements, documentation. If the house was breaking rules, then the camera would catch it in the act. He mounted it high in the corner of the living room, angled toward the ceiling light and the front door. He tested it twice. Clear image, stable connection, no blind spots. That night, Korn did not go to bed. He sat on the floor with his laptop open, the live feed filling the screen. The house around him felt tense, like a held breath stretched too long. The air smelled faintly of old smoke again, though nothing was burning. The clock on his laptop read 1:57 a.m. Nothing moved. At 1:58, the room looked exactly the same. The light was off. The shadows lay flat and harmless across the walls. At 1:59, the feed began to distort. At first, Korn thought it was a technical issue. The image wavered slightly, as if the camera were struggling to focus. Thin lines crawled across the screen, bending the edges of furniture, warping the corners of the room. His heart began to race. "This isn't happening," he whispered. At exactly 2 a.m., the screen exploded into static. Not white noise, not darkness. Something thicker, darker. The distortion pulsed in slow waves, as if the signal were being pushed aside by something heavier trying to pass through. Korn leaned closer, his breath fogging the screen. Then, in the middle of the interference, he saw it. A shape. Not fully formed, not sharp enough to describe, but undeniably close, so close that it seemed to press against the lens itself. The image suggested a human outline, tall and narrow, its head tilted slightly, as if it were examining the camera with quiet curiosity. Korn's stomach turned. The feed snapped back to normal. The living room appeared calm again. And the light was on. Korn spun around in the real room. The ceiling light glowed steadily, bathing the space in warm yellow, just as it always did at 2. The front door was still locked. No one stood beneath the light. When he looked back at the laptop, the recording timeline showed a gap. Exactly 12 seconds were missing. No static. No corrupted file. Just nothing. Korn replayed the footage again and again, his hands shaking. Each time, the same result. At 1:59, distortion. At 2 o'clock, a cut. At 2 hours 0 minutes and 12 seconds, the light already on. Whatever turned the light on did not want to be seen. And it knew the camera was watching. As Korn slowly closed the laptop, he felt a certainty settle over him, cold and absolute. The house was no longer just reacting to his presence. It was responding.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. Laughter above the ceiling. The first sound was soft enough that Korn almost ignored it. It came sometime after midnight, while he sat alone on the living room floor, his back pressed against the wall. The camera feed paused on his laptop screen. The house felt unusually still, as if it were resting after the effort of the night before. No flickering lights, no warmth in the air, no sense of being watched. Just silence. Then, a faint noise drifted down from above. At first, Korn thought it was the building settling. Old houses made sounds, he reminded himself. Wood expanded, metal contracted, pipes knocked against each other when the temperature changed. But this sound was different. It was rhythmic, short, light, almost playful. A soft giggle. Korn's breath caught in his throat. He tilted his head back slowly, his eyes tracing the ceiling. The sound came again, clearer this time, accompanied by a second voice, higher, sharper, unmistakably young. Children. Laughing. Not shouting, not crying, laughing quietly, as if they were sharing a secret they did not want adults to hear. "There's no one up there," Korn whispered. The house had no attic. He had checked the blueprints himself. Above the third floor was nothing but beams, insulation, and roofing tiles. No crawl space, no room for anyone to stand. let alone move around. The laughter continued. It shifted position, drifting across the ceiling from one end of the living room to the other. Footsteps following it, small, light steps that never touched the floor, only the hollow space above it. Quorn stood up. The moment his feet left the ground, the laughter stopped. The sudden silence was worse. His heart pounded as he scanned the room, his eyes darting to the staircase, the hallway, the locked door to the third floor. Everything looked the same, ordinary, still. Then, directly above his head, something scraped. Not loudly, not violently, just a gentle drag, as if fingernails were being drawn slowly across wood. Quorn backed away until his shoulders hit the wall. "No," he said aloud. "No, no, no." The scraping stopped. For several seconds, nothing happened. Quorn allowed himself to breathe again. Then a child's voice whispered his name. Not shouted. Not called. Whispered. "Quorn?" It came from inside the ceiling. The light turned on. Not just the living room, every light in the house burst to life at once, flooding the space with harsh yellow brightness. The warmth returned instantly, thick and suffocating, carrying with it the faint smell of burned plastic and old smoke. Quorn clamped his hands over his ears. The laughter returned, louder now, echoing from all directions at once, above him, behind the walls, inside the staircase. It sounded joyful, excited, as if something had just been found. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The lights went out. The house fell silent. Quorn slid down the wall and sat on the floor, shaking, his ears ringing. In the darkness, he understood something with terrifying clarity. The sounds were not echoes of the past. They were happening now. And whatever lived in the house was no longer hiding from him. It was playing. Chapter 8. The Locked Room. Quorn discovered the locked room on the third floor by accident. Or at least, that was what he told himself. He had been trying to avoid the upper level since the laughter began. Something about the staircase felt wrong now, too narrow, too steep, as if it led somewhere deeper than it should. But that night, long after the lights had gone out again, Quorn found himself climbing the stairs without fully realizing he had made the decision. The air grew colder with each step. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched longer than Quorn remembered. The walls seemed to press inward, narrowing the space, guiding him toward the very end, where a small door sat, half hidden in shadow. The locked room. Quorn had noticed it earlier, of course. A narrow door with peeling white paint and an old metal padlock hanging from the handle. The lock was rusted, thick with age, yet oddly intact. No scratches, no signs of force. He stopped several steps away. The house was silent. Then he saw the light. A thin line of yellow glowed beneath the door, spilling across the floor like something alive. It pulsed gently, brightening and fading in a slow, uneven rhythm, breathing. "That's not possible," Quorn whispered. The lights downstairs were off. He was sure of it. He had checked every switch himself. The glow intensified. Quorn's chest tightened as he moved closer, his footsteps unnaturally loud in the narrow hall. When he reached the door, he noticed something that made his stomach twist. The padlock was warm. Not room temperature, not warmed by the air. Warm like skin. His hand hovered over the handle, trembling. Every warning he had received, every unspoken rule he had instinctively followed, screamed at him to turn around. Behind him, the hallway lights flickered. Once. Twice. Quorn grabbed the handle. The padlock clicked open on its own. It fell to the floor with a dull metallic thud, the sound echoing far longer than it should have. The door creaked as it slowly swung inward. Light poured out. The room beyond was small and windowless, its walls stained a dull gray. The air inside was thick and hot, carrying the unmistakable smell of smoke and something sweeter beneath it, burnt sugar. Maybe, or flesh. The ceiling light inside the room was on. And Quorn knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the room where the house had started to burn. Something inside the room shifted. Not a sound. Just movement. Waiting.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The photographs that should not exist. The room was silent. No buzzing from the light. No crackle of fire. No breath but Korn's own, shallow, uneven, barely under control. The door closed behind him. Not slammed. Not pushed. It simply shut, as if it had never been open at all. Korn turned slowly, his hand reaching back for the handle. It was gone. Not broken, not missing. The handle was simply no longer there. The walls of the room were lined from floor to ceiling with photographs. Hundreds of them. They were pinned neatly in rows, edges aligned with unnatural precision, as if someone had taken great care to arrange them. Every photograph was the same size, the same framing, the same angle. The living room. His living room. Korn stepped closer, his legs heavy, his stomach tightening with each step. The first few photographs showed an empty room, dimly lit, taken from the same corner where he had mounted the camera. The timestamp printed at the bottom of each photo made his vision blur. 2 a.m. Every single one. As Korn moved along the wall, the photos began to change. In some, the lights were off. In others, they were on. In all of them, the room looked occupied. Not by furniture. By presence. Shadows gathered where shadows should not have been. Thick and stretched, clinging to the ceiling, pooling beneath the light. In several photos, the shadows appeared to lean inward, as though drawn toward the center of the room. Then Korn saw himself. At first, it was only his shoulder. Then the back of his head. Then his full body. Standing in the living room. Always facing away from the camera. Always frozen. Always at 2 a.m. His throat closed. In the most recent photographs, his posture had changed. In the earlier ones, he stood stiff, uncertain, his arms hanging awkwardly at his sides. But in the newer images that could only have been taken after he moved in, his shoulders were relaxed. Compliant. As if he belonged there. Korn's gaze drifted to the final photograph on the far wall. It was larger than the rest. The timestamp read tonight 2 a.m. The image showed the living room bathed in warm yellow light. Korn stood in the center. And behind him stood 4 figures. A man. A woman. 2 children. Their faces were blurred, burned away by light, except for the woman. Her face was clear. Her eyes were opened too wide. And she was smiling. The ceiling light flickered. Korn felt something brush against his back, gentle, familiar, possessive. A woman's voice whispered near his ear, warm as breath against skin. You came home on time. The light went out. And somewhere in the dark, a camera shutter clicked. Chapter 10. The mother in the frame. Korn woke up on the living room floor. The lights were off. The air was cold again. For a moment, he wondered if the locked room, the photographs, the whisper in his ear had been nothing more than a stress-induced hallucination, his mind finally breaking under fear and exhaustion. Then he smelled smoke. Not thick, not choking. Just enough to remind him of something unfinished. He sat up slowly, his muscles aching as if he had been standing for hours. The camera was still mounted in the corner. The laptop lay closed beside him. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Korn stood and walked toward the 3rd floor. His steps unsteady. The hallway felt shorter now. The walls no longer pressed in. When he reached the end, the locked room was gone. There was no door. Only a blank wall, painted the same dull gray as the rest of the house. No, Korn whispered. He pressed his palms against it. Solid, cold, real. But when he turned around, his breath caught in his throat. A photograph hung on the wall behind him. It had not been there before. The frame was old and darkened, its glass cloudy with age. The image inside showed the familiar living room at 2 a.m. Korn recognized the angle instantly. And there he was, standing in the center of the room. This time, he was facing the camera. His eyes were open. Empty. Behind him stood the woman. The mother. She was clearer than before. Her features sharp and unmistakable. Her hair was pulled back tightly. Her clothes scorched at the edges, as if she had stepped out of fire and never fully left it behind. Her hands rested gently on Korn's shoulders. Possessively. Korn stepped back, The woman in the photograph lifted her head. Just slightly. The glass cracked. A thin line split across the frame, spreading outward like a spiderweb. Korn watched in horror as the woman's eyes shifted, slowly, deliberately, until they were no longer looking at the version of him inside the photograph. They were looking at him. The lights in the hallway flickered. Once. Twice. The photograph began to hum softly, vibrating against the wall. Korn felt the same warmth he had felt every night at 2 in the morning, creeping up his spine, wrapping around his chest. A voice drifted through the hallway, low and calm. "You're awake early," it said. Korn ran. He didn't stop until he reached the living room, his heart hammering, his breath burning in his lungs. The clock on the wall, one he did not remember hanging there, read 1:58 a.m. The house was preparing again. And this time, the mother was no longer content to stay inside the frame.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The Hour When Spirits Return. The monk did not invite Korn inside. He stood at the threshold of the small wooden shrine, one bare foot slightly behind the other, as if careful not to let something cross with him. Incense smoke drifted lazily from behind his shoulder, thick enough to sting the eyes. "You came from the house at the end of the alley," the monk said. It was not a question. Korn nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The monk studied him for a long moment, his gaze slow and deliberate, tracing invisible lines across Korn's face, his chest, his hands. When his eyes finally met Korn's, his expression darkened. "You've been seen," he said quietly. Inside the shrine, the air was heavy with old prayers and melted wax. Korn sat on the floor, his knees drawn close, while the monk placed a small bowl of water between them. He dropped a single white thread into it and watched as it slowly sank. "What happens at 2 in the morning?" Korn asked. The monk did not answer immediately. Instead, he lit another incense stick. "In Thai belief," he said at last, "there is an hour when the living are weakest, and the dead are closest to home." Korn's fingers curled into his palms. 2. The monk nodded. 2 in the morning is not the hour of death. It is the hour of return. He leaned forward. Spirits who die violently do not understand that they are gone. They repeat what they remember. Lights turning on, doors opening, a family waiting. Korn swallowed. The house turns on the light. "Because the mother still believes everyone should be home by then," the monk said. "Light means safety. Light means together." A chill ran through Korn. "Why me?" The monk's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because you stayed." He gestured toward Korn's chest. "Most people leave before the house finishes recognizing them. You slept through the hour. You woke up and did not run." "So what does that mean?" Korn asked, his voice trembling. "Can you remove her?" The monk shook his head slowly. "She is not attached to the house," he said. "The house is attached to her." Korn's heart sank. "Then what can I do?" The monk reached into a wooden box and pulled out a small amulet. Its surface darkened with age. "If the light turns on," he said, placing it in Korn's hand, "do not look for the source. Do not follow the warmth. And above all, do not respond when they speak to you." Korn remembered the whisper in the dark. "You came home on time." "What happens if I answer?" he asked. The monk's eyes lowered. "Then the house will no longer treat you as a guest," he said. "You will become part of what is being waited for." As Korn stood to leave, the monk added one final thing, his voice barely louder than the incense crackling. "The light turning on is not an invitation," he said. "It is a count." Korn stepped back into the street. Behind him, somewhere far away at the end of the alley, a house was already getting ready for 2 o'clock. Chapter 12. The house would not let him leave. Korn began packing before sunset. He did not wait for night. He did not wait for certainty. Every instinct in his body screamed that if he stayed through another 2 o'clock, something irreversible would happen. Clothes, laptop, documents. He shoved everything into his backpack with shaking hands, knocking over a chair in his haste. The sound echoed too long. The house felt alert now, awake in a way that had nothing to do with light. By 1:45 a.m., Korn was standing by the front door, fully dressed, shoes on, backpack strapped tight against his shoulders. The amulet from the monk hung around his neck, cold against his skin. He reached for the doorknob. It did not turn. Korn frowned and tried again. The lock had worked perfectly all day. He leaned his weight into it. Nothing. The hallway clock chimed softly. 1:55 a.m. Korn stepped back, his pulse rising. He moved to the windows instead, yanking at the curtains. They would not open. The fabric felt stiff, glued in place, as though it had been painted directly onto the glass. No, Korn whispered. He ran for the staircase, planning to escape through the upper floor, through anything that led away from the living room. But halfway up, he stopped short. The stairs did not end where they should have. They stretched upward into darkness, step after step repeating endlessly. The third floor nowhere in sight. The walls along the staircase felt closer now, breathing heat against his skin. The clock chimed again. 1:57 a.m. Korn's phone vibrated. No signal. No service. No battery. The screen lit up anyway. A photograph filled the display. The living room. The light off. Empty. Timestamp. 1:58 a.m. Korn screamed and threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, but the image remained burned into his vision. The temperature began to rise. The familiar warmth crept in, thick and intimate, wrapping around him like arms pulling him back toward the center of the house. From somewhere behind the walls, a voice spoke, soft, patient. "You're late." 1:59 a.m. The living room light flickered once. Korn pressed his hands over his ears, remembering the monk's warning. Do not answer. The air smelled of smoke again. 2 a.m. For the first time since he moved in, the light did not turn on. The darkness was complete. And then he felt it. Breath against the back of his neck. Warm. Familiar. A hand rested gently on his shoulder. A woman's voice whispered, calm and certain. You stayed. The house exhaled. And somewhere deep inside its walls, something finished counting.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. When the light did not turn on. Korn did not remember falling asleep. One moment, he was standing in the darkness, every muscle locked in terror, the weight of a hand still burning into his shoulder. The next, he was aware of cold seeping through his clothes, of hard wood beneath his back, of a silence so complete it felt artificial. He opened his eyes. Morning light filtered weakly through the curtains. For a few seconds, relief washed over him, so sudden and overwhelming that it made his chest ache. He was alive. The night was over. 2 o'clock had passed, and the house had not taken him. Then he noticed what was missing. The warmth was gone. Not just the heat from the lights or the air, all warmth. The house felt hollow now, like an empty shell abandoned after something important had moved in somewhere deeper. Korn sat up slowly. The living room looked unchanged, but something in it felt finished. The air no longer pressed against him. The sense of being watched had faded, replaced by something worse. Indifference. The amulet lay on the floor beside him. Its cord snapped cleanly in two. When Korn touched it, it crumbled into gray dust between his fingers. No, he whispered. He checked the clock. 2 a.m. The hands were frozen there, locked in place, unmoving. Korn's breath came faster. He tried the light switch. Nothing. No click. No resistance. It moved freely, uselessly, as though it were no longer connected to anything at all. The house no longer needed light. He walked through each room, his footsteps echoing strangely, as if the walls were farther apart than before. The photographs were gone. The camera had vanished. Even the smell of smoke had disappeared. Only one thing remained. On the living room wall, where no frame had ever hung before, there was a faint dark outline, the shape of a family portrait, burned permanently into the paint. 5 figures. Korn counted them with shaking hands. 1 father, 1 mother, 2 children, and 1 space beside them, slightly darker than the rest. Waiting. A sound came from the kitchen. Not laughter. Not whispering. A chair being pulled back. Korn stood frozen as footsteps crossed the floor behind him, slow. Unhurried, domestic. He smelled soap again, the same clean scent he had noticed on the first night. A woman's voice spoke from just out of sight. "Sit down," she said gently. "You must be tired." Quorn closed his eyes. He understood now why the light hadn't turned on. There was no need to count anymore. He had already been included. Chapter 14. The house with one more light. People in the alley noticed the change the next morning. At first, it was something small, easy to ignore, a detail that didn't quite fit, but not alarming enough to stop daily routines. The banana seller arrived at her usual time and paused when she looked down the alley. Frowning. The house at the end was lit. Not brightly, not aggressively. Just one light, glowing softly from the second floor, even though the sun was already high. "That's strange," she murmured. The light stayed on all day. Motorbikes passed, children walked home from school. A delivery driver stopped briefly at the mouth of the alley, glanced toward the house, and then left without getting off his bike. No one went closer than they had to. By afternoon, the owner called the police. He said he hadn't heard from his tenant in 2 days, said the young man wasn't answering calls, said he wanted to make sure nothing had gone wrong. 2 officers arrived just before sunset. They walked down the alley slowly, their radios crackling softly at their belts. The house looked calm, ordinary. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was cool and clean. No smell of smoke. No sign of struggle. No sign of anyone living there at all. The furniture was neatly arranged. The floor spotless. No bags. No clothes. No laptop. It was as if the tenant had never existed. "Check upstairs," one officer said. On the second floor, they found the light. It was on in an empty room. The switch was in the off position. The officer frowned and reached up to turn it off. It did not respond. When he stepped back, his partner noticed something on the wall. A photograph. It was framed neatly, centered at eye level. A family portrait. A man stood on one side, his face blurred. A woman stood beside him, her features clear and calm. 2 children leaned against her, smiling faintly. And next to them stood a young man. Tall, thin, familiar. The officers stared in silence. "Wasn't the tenant alone?" one of them asked quietly. The other nodded. "Yeah." In the photograph, the young man's eyes were open. He was smiling. Behind the glass, the light flickered, just once, casting a warm glow over the family. At exactly 2 a.m., the neighbors would later report, another light turned on. This time, on the 3rd floor. The house, it seemed, had decided it was no longer empty. And it was ready to welcome someone new.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. 2 o'clock. Today. The house was listed again a week later. The price was the same, too low to be reasonable, too tempting to ignore. The photos showed clean rooms, soft light, and a quiet alley. There was no mention of the previous tenant, no record of a disappearance, nothing unusual enough to raise suspicion. A young woman moved in on a Tuesday evening. Her name was May. She worked long hours at a clinic across town and wanted a place that was quiet, affordable, and close enough to sleep without traffic noise. When she first stepped inside the house, she noticed how clean it was, how calm. "It feels warm," she said to herself. That night, May slept deeply. No dreams. No sounds. No sense of being watched. At 1:58 a.m., the house was still. At 1:59, something shifted. The air grew warmer, gentle and familiar, like a blanket pulled over sleeping shoulders. Somewhere in the walls, a sound moved, slow, careful, practiced, a presence waking up, not in a hurry. At 2 a.m., the light turned on. Just one. Soft yellow, spilling into the hallway. May stirred but did not wake. She smiled faintly in her sleep, turning onto her side as if comforted by the glow. In the living room, the family photograph hung quietly on the wall. 5 figures stood together. They did not move. They did not need to. From the hallway, a 6th shadow stretched briefly across the floor, pausing beneath the light before fading back into the walls. The house listened, counted, confirmed. Outside, at the far end of the alley, The banana seller woke suddenly. Heart pounding. She sat up in bed, staring into the darkness. "It's 2," she whispered. She did not look out the window. She did not pray. She already knew. Back in the house, the light remained on for exactly 3 minutes. Long enough for everyone to be home. Long enough for the house to be sure. Then it turned itself off. The silence returned, complete, satisfied. And somewhere deep inside the walls, where heat never fully fades and smoke never truly clears, a woman's voice spoke softly, lovingly, to no one in particular. "Everyone's here now." The clock began to move again. They say that if you hear a light turn on at 2 in the morning, don't assume it's an electrical problem, because it might be someone making sure that everyone is home. And if you wake up tonight at that exact hour, take a look. Ask yourself, who is that light turned on for? Sleep well, if you still can.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.